It's that time again, folks. Monster Hunter Wilds has just had its expansion announced, Ascendance. And with an expansion, we're of course going to get upgrades to existing monsters, returning monsters, and entirely new ones. Wilds has had an interesting arc of development since it came out, so I thought it would be a good topic to consider what we might see in the expansion in terms of how both the existing roster could change and what monsters are likely going to be added. From being commonly regarded as too easy, to being actually somewhat abnormally challenging for a base game after the title updates, I think there's much to consider with the direction of Ascendance. The developers have clearly paid a lot of attention to the feedback people have had over Wilds, and quickly put it into practice for the title updates. I don't think the transition from the end of High Rank into Master Rank is going to be very smooth though. As is typical for Master Rank, you won't need to have completed all of the title update quests just to progress. This means there's likely going to be a bit of a gap in gameplay feel if you've gotten used to fighting the highest tier monsters in High Rank. It'll probably take Master Rank a little while to catch up, and surpass the title updates in terms of challenge and design. This gap has sort of always existed, but I think it's going to be especially pronounced in Wilds due to how drastically different the design of the game changed over time. It would likewise be jarring, just for a different audience, if the beginning of Master Rank scaled linearly from the end of the title updates. The jump from finishing the base game quests to suddenly fighting 10-star style monsters would probably be off-putting. This is sort of the box they've painted themselves into. I'm not sure there's a clean solution to avoiding a weird transition. The change in design from feedback was just too large. There are a few monsters that I think stand out as being obvious inclusions to Master Rank. The foremost, of course, being Shigaru Magala. As we've already seen, Ascendance seems to be fairly Elder Dragon focused, since the base game was almost entirely absent of them. It's not news to anyone that Gore Magala is the immature form of the Elder Dragon Shigaru Magala, so it feels natural that it would be included. Wilds gave Gore a decent makeover, and resulted in probably one of the best fights in the game, so I think the expectations for Shigaru will be high. Sunbreak already gave Shigaru quite a big upgrade from its previous old-gen forms, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of that get carried over into Wilds. But I would also expect some aspects of even Risen Shigaru to make it into Wilds version, just to add some extra sauce, along with some new things of course as well. As we've already seen, Kushala Daora has been confirmed, much to some people's disappointment. Even more so, this could mean the addition of Teostra and Chameleos. What Monhun game is complete without the Elder Dragon trio? It's not necessarily confirmed, of course. World only had 2 out of 3 of them, and they could even opt to only have Kushala. But I do think it's a fair bet. I think my expectation is we're going to see something quite new with them if they do all make it in. While World kept the design of Kushala and Teostra largely similar to their old-gen counterparts, Rise opted to give them a total revamp along with Chameleos. Wilds, on the other hand, I think will actually take them in a totally different direction. I think they will keep their classic gimmicks of Wind Aura, Heat Aura, and Invisibility, but their general fight design will be unlike either World or Rise. We've already seen with Gore Magala that Wilds is not necessarily satisfied with just bringing over the monster's Rise or Sunbreak versions, but rather creating their own revamp in their own direction. These monsters have often been controversial in recent times for their mechanics some deem to be annoying, along with some just being tired of their repeated inclusion. Rise went in the direction of reducing some of the friction of their quote-unquote annoying mechanics, to seemingly some success, as many people consider them to be good versions of those monsters. But I think Wilds will try to deal with it in its own way. Something I'd like to see in particular is the re-addition of invisibility as one of Chameleos' main mechanics. Over time, invisibility has become something of an aesthetic rather than a real mechanic, and this was especially obvious in Rise. But if you go back far enough, Chameleos actually spent most of its time completely invisible, and used it to make it harder to keep track of it and avoid its attacks. I think Chameleos has felt increasingly generic as a poison monster, and I'd really like to see them bring invisibility back to the forefront of its fighting style, with consideration given to modern gameplay of course. And also, give Kushala back its World Tornadoes. I will not be silenced. We've also seen that Lao Shan will be making its triumphant return. I think this opens the door to many interesting things. The only siege fight Wilds had in the base game was Gogmazios, and it was pretty light on siege mechanics. Laoshan is almost certainly going to bring siege mechanics back to relevancy, and it's a massive monster, which could mean we could see other massive monsters with siege mechanics make their return as well. The most notable of which is definitely Genmoran and Darinmoran. Many people, myself included, thought they would be part of Wild's base game due to the giant desert of the Windward Plains, but that didn't end up happening. It's clear now that focus on monsters like that just wasn't part of the plan for Wilds. But with Elder Dragons, Sieges, and massive monsters being confirmed for the Wilds expansion, I think now is the best chance of seeing one of the Morans make their modern generation debut. It's kind of up in the air how a fight like Laoshan is going to play out in a modern game, and by extension how a fight like Genmoran would play out. These fights were relics of their time, and certainly couldn't just be copy-pasted into Wilds with any success. They will need to have a full reimagining. In a sort of related tangent, I recently played through the game Granblue Fantasy Relink, which has a sort of Monster Hunter style to it. And in that game, they had what is essentially a Monhun siege battle, but done in a way that felt very modern and enjoyable. Balancing both spectacle and challenge, it makes you contend with the boss directly, with various attacks you need to dodge and mechanics to deal with, but it also contains cannons that you use to both damage the boss while it's not in range, and prevent attacks from hitting the arena, along with softening the difficulty of some DPS checks that happen during the battle. It's a pretty coherent blend of mechanics that actually had a very Monster Hunter feel to it, and it really made me think that something like this could be used in an actual Monhun game, to great success as a return of a true siege battle, such as Laoshan or Genmoran. Elders aren't the only thing that are going to be added to Wilds, though. So for some non-Elder inclusions, I think we could look to 4 Ultimate. Wilds is a game that borrows from 4 Ultimate in several ways, so I think some monsters that have been trapped in that game since then could make their return, such as some of the 4th gen subspecies like Shrouded Nursilla and Tiger Stripe Zamtrios. I think Shrouded is an easy inclusion, since we already have Nursilla, and it would fit well with the Wilds locales. Base Zamtrios probably wouldn't have worked within any of the Wild zones. While we do have an ice map, it doesn't really have the terrain for Zamtrios. Tiger Stripe, however, would probably be just fine. I think these 2 monsters are often forgotten, and even when playing 4 Ultimate, you don't really pay much attention to them, so I think it would be cool to see them get some modern attention in an expansion. Another 4 Ultimate monster that I think would be cool to see come back would be Najarala and/or Tidal Najarala. Tidal has been locked to 4U, and we haven't seen normal Najarala since GU. Either one would make a fine inclusion to the Scarlet Forest, probably. Considering they freed themselves from the Leviathan skeleton problems, Snake Wyverns should be on the table as well, I think. If they were to add Najarala, I think it would be a great time to add a new Snake Wyvern as well. Maybe we can finally get the Great Remobra. Najarala has been the only large Snake Wyvern since its inclusion, so it's really overdue for some new monsters. Base Wilds kind of felt like the Leviathan game. We got several new ones, along with returning ones, so perhaps Ascendance can be the Snake expansion. I am curious what they'll do with Guardian monsters. I assume they will be in Master Rank with updated fights, but what about new Guardians? I personally thought Guardians were a massive success. I really enjoyed fighting all of them, and I think they're a really interesting twist on monster variants. I would be very, very interested in seeing new Guardian monsters show up. It could be a way to spice up some otherwise bland monsters, perhaps a Guardian Baroth. But they could also use it to create a big impact, maybe Guardian Malfestio or Duramboros. Or they could just inflict unlimited pain with Guardian Deviljho. The possibilities with Guardian monsters feel endless. Iceborne brought Raging Brachydios back and revamped it into a sort of major boss fight. I was wondering what other older monsters they could give that treatment to, and I think one I would really like to see is Molten Tigrex. Molten Tigrex can be quite a challenging fight in 4 Ultimate, and getting brought to a modern game with the intention of giving it the Raging Brachy treatment I think would be very fun. It's a pretty oppressive fight in its original form, so to maintain that feeling in Wilds, a game with significantly more tools for the hunter to deal with the monsters, they would have to really crank its speed and mechanical complexity up. We saw something like this in Sunbreak, where many of the hardest monsters were designed around the hunter's toolkit. Instead of giving the hunter an advantage, it only allowed you to stay on even footing with the monster. I assume we will see something similar in Wilds, so I'm not too concerned about how the challenging fights will be designed. Personally, I believe it's been a long time since any Tigrex has been particularly challenging or interesting, and Molten Tigrex stands out as one that is different from either base or brute in that regard. It would be cool to see the others show up in Wilds as well, but I think Molten Tigrex would have the highest potential. It feels like they just don't want to give base or brute Tigrex the kind of juice they really need to shine. But it could change, I suppose. Wilds has had plenty of surprises in monster design. As purely a personal request, I hope they add Nibblesnarf. There's not any particular reason why it should be in the game, or any reason why it should take up a slot for an expansion edition. However, I am requesting it regardless. It hasn't been in a game in quite a while, unless you count Monster Hunter Stories 3, and they don't even let you ride it there. Cute little man. The base monsters of Wilds are of course going to be seeing some upgrades and possibly new subspecies or variants as well. There's two monsters that really stand out to me as strong contenders for subspecies, one of which is Chemetris. I'm always really interested in seeing lower tier monsters get new versions, because it can often spice up their fight in cool ways. Chemetris especially is a monster that felt pretty weak in the base game, so I think there's a lot of potential in giving it a new form. Its base toolkit is pretty simplistic, all it does is swing its tail around to create fire. I think a variant that focuses on giving it new ways to create and spread fire would be the most suitable, like letting it shoot out its feathers, sticking them into the ground and then causing them to ignite, and create wider, reaching hazardous spots. Lalabrina is the next candidate. I think its position in the base game was quite good, and its moveset is a strong foundation for future additions or a variant. In terms of variants, I think I'd like to see a version that's sort of a status master. In addition to paralysis, I think inflicting toxic poison at the same time would be cool, as well as adding webs to the mix perhaps, turning it into a monster that can completely disable you in multiple ways while also damaging you. Something I've criticized Wilds for in the past is a lack of strong loss of control effects. Monsters who can reduce your effectiveness or render you entirely unable to act in a way that sets you up for follow-up attacks. I think Lalabrina would be a great monster to exert some of this gameplay with. To really make this effective, they would probably need to give it new ways to inflict status. Currently, it's rather easy to avoid the paralysis of Lalabrina in the base game. So giving it some projectiles or making the little floating thingamajigs move around in difficult-to-avoid patterns would be effective probably. After a somewhat tumultuous period of development for Wilds, I think Ascendance is poised to really get the game back on track. From launch to now, we've seen them respond to criticism of difficulty and imbalances caused by new mechanics like wounding. I would expect these things to continue into the expansion, with it being designed from the ground up to support the powerful tools and mechanics hunters have at their disposal. But this is also a tale we've heard before. Iceborne introduced the infamous Clutch Claw, which turned out to be overly centralizing, and forced you to interact with this new mechanic frequently by tenderizing and wall bashing. Rise launched with previously unseen amounts of hunter mobility and power with wire bugs and skills, which often trivialized many hunts, until Sunbreak adjusted the design to make the monsters more capable of competing with the hunters. Now, Wilds launches with yet more mobility and mechanics like Focus Mode, practically eliminating the need for positioning, and Wounding, which deals massive damage and gives easy topples essentially for free. You could even extend this trend all the way back to Generations Ultimate, with Valor Style giving you tremendous power on most weapons, while also granting you the ability to basically survive any hit with Valor Sheathing. It's a very curious trend of new mechanics being added that seem to be poorly balanced on their first iteration, requiring additional balancing in expansions, and in some cases, entirely deteriorating aspects of Monster Hunter's core gameplay. With Wild's Ascendance, this pattern will certainly be followed. Monsters will probably get much more threatening, and even counter the capabilities of the Hunter. They may apply additional balancing changes to Hunter movesets, Focus Mode, and Wounding. But they're also adding a new tool, the Boost Bracer, which appears to have a similar role to the Clutch Claw, in that it will enhance the combat capabilities of the Hunter, giving you access to new moves. Will we see this also be too powerful or too overly centralizing? Only time will tell, but history does not inspire confidence. Regardless though, I am excited for Ascendance. The new monsters they've already shown look cool, and the new area does as well. I'm sure there will be plenty of fun to be had as always. What are your hopes or concerns for Ascendance? What monsters do you hope to see get added or changed? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.